Welcome to the Iowa Gold Star Military Museum. We're sitting in the area of the 34th Infantry Division. It's an Iowa National Guard division with troops from Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota, North and South Dakota. Formally organized 25 August 1917 at Camp Cody, New Mexico. Men from the 34th Infantry Division that showed up at Camp Cody, New Mexico belonged to the two regiments here, the 133rd Infantry Regiment and the 135 Infantry Regiment from Minnesota, also known as To the Last Man Battalion or regiment, as it were, for their heroic stand at Gettysburg on the second day of the battle at Gettysburg. Out of some 340 men that advanced, there were only 40 of them standing at the end of the day. The other regiment belonging to the 34th Infantry Division, which is symbolized by the Red Bull shoulder patch, that other regiment is the 168th Infantry Regiment. And interestingly enough, that division saw duty with the Rainbow Division during World War I. These crests tell a story. I'll go to the 168th first. The palm tree is for duty in the Philippines during the Spanish-American War. The cactus is for duty on the Mexican border. And the rainbow is because this regiment served with the 42nd Rainbow Division. Many of the same symbols are shown in the other regimental crest. The 133rd Regiment, Iowa's own, known as the Iron Man Regiment, now the Iron Man Battalion, cactus for duty on the Mexican border, fleur-de-lis for duty during World War I. However, they did not really see a lot of combat overseas because they arrived late. And finally, the Spanish castle, also for mobilization and service during the Spanish-American War. Our brothers up in Minnesota with the 135 Infantry Regiment or Division have many of the same symbols, the Red Bull, the fleur-de-lis, the cutlasses for duty during the Spanish-American War. So these icons, that I call them icons, of the 34th Infantry Division can tell a great story of that division. I want to point out the 34th Infantry Division patch. A gentleman from Cedar Rapids belonging to the 34th Division, he was an artist, his name was Marvin Cohn, designed the patch. Originally it was not red, it was a sun-bleached skull of a bull. Later on the Army made it a red color going along with the color of war. It used to be the skull of a dried bovine animal. And the black background is a Mexican walla. It's a water jug. And it was significant in the New Mexican desert where the 34th Infantry Division trained for World War I. So that is the kind of the history behind the 34th Infantry patch. Realize that the Infantry Division was nicknamed the Sandstorm Division early on for all the sand that they had to fight in the windy desert conditions at Camp Cody, New Mexico. Nicknamed the Red Bulls, as you can easily understand. That came from the Germans from the hard fighting in Italy when the Germans named the soldiers the Fighting Red Bulls. It's just impressive when I have visitors to the museum and they realize we have so much of the 34th Infantry Division story told all around us. It's been an Iowa National Guard division since 1917, with headquarters in Iowa up through World War II. They were mobilized from the Iowa National Guard on February 10 of 1941. They went to Camp Claiborne, Louisiana. Men were drafted for 1 year, but that was delayed then by the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7 of 1941. At that time, the soldiers knew their 1 year duty was going to be extended for the duration of the war. Once they were mobilized for duty, the division then landed on North African shores to begin Operation Torch, driving of the Germans and Italians out of Africa. They were successful at the cost of many men and a lot of heartache. In the battles of Faid, the Germans captured an entire regiment of the 34th Infantry Division. It was the 168th Infantry Regiment, leading to many interesting tales. Some of the soldiers managed to escape and make it back to friendly lines. About 1900 later on ended up in Germany in prisoner of war camps. Following the battle at Faid was the Battle of Kasserine Pass. The division helped to hold the line. While serving in North Africa, the Battle of Hill 609 was one of the key battles to drive the Germans and Italians out of Tunisia. 250,000 Germans and Italians were captured, and they were the luckiest soldiers of that bunch because they came to the United States. They were shipped back to the United States. Many of them ended up in a prisoner of war camp headquartered at Algona, Iowa. They were behind wire, but they were well treated here in the United States. Many of them were then farmed out to local farmers in the area. But the 34th Division did not serve in Sicily. They got a break. They were training their new men. They landed then with the landings on Salerno, Italy, under General Mark Clark. As the soldiers landed, they were threatened by German tanks. One artillery battalion from the 34th Infantry Division was split off and landed early at Salerno. They didn't land with the 34th, but they were pushed forward. They took German tanks under direct fire and drove them off the beach that day. Without that timely action of that artillery battalion, that landing could have been put at great risk. Later, the next day, the rest of the division landed, along with other divisions of the Second Army. They mobilized then and moved north up the Italian Boot. The men of the 34th, along with men of the 135 and all the other divisions, were faced with challenging terrain. The Germans were always uphill from them, and the rivers cut huge oxbows, and so that river was crossed 3 times before they were able to pass the Volturno River. They then came to Monte Cassino, and that was a scene of bitter fighting for many days. Finally, the 34th was asked to remove themselves from that area, and another infantry division then completed the taking of the Monte Cassino after it had been bombed to smithereens. The men then were landed next at Anzio beachhead, which was a narrow beachhead farther north up the coast. Hopefully the plan was to flank the Germans. It did not work as intended. So the American soldiers were stuck on a real dangerous beachhead for several days until they finally worked their way out of that, moved up to Rome, while the soldiers that landed on D-Day pushed inland. Then we had a group of soldiers from Mark Clark's army that went up and landed in southern France. That was another decent landing. They were not under fire there, but then the Germans reacted quickly. From Rome, they moved up to the winter line up at northern Italian border when the war ended, and the soldiers of the 34th American Infantry Division received the surrender of the German 34th Infantry Division. So I guess the circle was squared.